hub,
and spoke. Audio Collective.
Commercial Type is now shipping Double Accent Pop, our first comprehensive type specimen in nearly a decade, featuring our full library in a compact paperback format. This book is intended for reading as much as it is for looking at type, with an essay by writer Molly Lambert exploring why some of the most iconic duos in pop music history flourished or flopped. Workshop's founder Chris Wu had free reign on the design, giving each thread its own layout and showcasing the entire Commercial Type library. The specimen is a buoyant fusion of content and form, irreverent, opinionated, and exhilarating. Find it now at commercialtype.com.
While many printers have shifted their focus, Freeport Press has remained committed to the art of print. For companies that need a printing partner for magazines, look no further than Freeport Press. We offer the capabilities a customer would expect from a national printer while offering the level of customer service clients expect from a family-owned business. Freeport Press. We do print, and we do it well.
freeportpress.com.
My role was finding new great photographers that could shoot covers. That's really the most important thing at the magazine. Even though the inside pictures are ultimately much more interesting, the cover is the most important thing. And the way I looked at it is I'm going to call the photographers that I love. And if they say yes, that's great. And if they say no, that's okay too. I mean, everybody wanted to shoot for Rolling Stone. I didn't realize the power until I started calling people, and everybody was interested.
This is Print is Dead, Long Live Print, a podcast about magazines and the people who made and make them. I'm Deborah Bishop.
I'm Patrick Mitchell.
I'm Sean Plotner. Close your eyes and picture a classic Rolling Stone cover. Dozens probably come to mind. Portraits of music legends, movie stars, political icons, cultural rebels. Bruce, Bono, Madonna. These images are etched into our cultural memory as more than mere photographs. They're statements. But when we remember the cover, and maybe even the photographer, how often do we remember the person who made it all happen? The one who dreamed up the concept, found the right photographer, navigated the logistics, managed the personalities, and ultimately brought that unforgettable image to life. It's the photo editor. But who thinks about the photo editor? Photo editors are essential, especially at a magazine like Rolling Stone. For decades, its covers defined our visual culture. Behind every iconic cover is a photo director making hundreds of invisible decisions under pressure, facing tight budgets, dealing with unpredictable talent, and shifting editorial winds. They're the ones keeping shoots on track when the talent shows up 2 hours late. They're the ones coaxing photographers into greatness. They're the person behind the people behind the camera. Photo editors are expected to be tastemakers, producers, diplomats, caterers, and art directors all at once. Although their work is everywhere, their names are not. They're underthanked, underseen, too often unknown. This is the paradox of their work. When a shoot goes well, it looks effortless. When it doesn't, guess who takes the bullet? Laurie Kratochvil, Rolling Stone's visionary director of photography from 1982 to 1994, knows this all too well. I'd like to pick up right where we were talking about Mick Jagger and his underwear, if we could just start there. You're at Rolling Stone, you're the director of photography at a photo shoot with Mick Jagger of the Rolling Stones. Somehow you got him in his underwear, but I'll let you tell the story.
Okay, it was an unusual shoot because we were only shooting Mick. I had been used to shooting the whole group, but I think he had an album coming out, a solo album. And we set up the shoot, and his assistant said, we're going to come, and it's just going to be Mick and I. That's going to be it. It's going to be very low key. William Coupon was the photographer, and it was down in the Village. And they arrived, and they had some clothes. We did our introductions, and he went into another room. And I guess it was about 10 minutes later, the door opened, and out he came, standing there in his underwear, which was shocking. Not really shocking, but I was very surprised. He didn't have anything else on, and he's teeny tiny. Anyway, he said, oh, could you put some music on? And I just froze. I was like, oh my God, what on earth do I put on for Mick Jagger? So I went to the tapes, and there wasn't very much. We're still in the year of tapes. So I put Marvin Gaye on, and it was perfect. It was an unusual shoot because usually in those days you had 20 people at the shoot.
And I assume he was happy with your selection.
I think he was, and I don't know if you're familiar with William Coupon, but he was shooting these colored backgrounds in those days, and he was photographing a lot of people, very famous people, and he would change the background up a little bit. But it was great being at a shoot where it wasn't a big production. I really enjoyed that.
And just for the sake of filling people in who may not seen these shots, boxers or briefs?
Briefs.
Okay. This was before Coupon was using that backdrop?
No, he was using it. Using it. I liked William a lot and we used him a lot, but I also knew what I was going to get, which isn't necessarily the way I do things. But in this case, I wanted to know what I was going to get. I wanted to know that it wasn't going to take that long, that it was predictable. But what happened when we weren't shooting wasn't predictable.
That's a great point for me to step in and say, we're talking to Laurie Kratochvil, the legendary director of photography who spent a long time at Rolling Stone, 1982 to 1994, and at InStyle magazine, 94 to 2005.
Yeah,
and
two magazines in, 25 years?
About 25 years, quarter of a century. You've also done a fair bit of consulting and work at other places. We're talking to you from Palm Springs?
Yes, Palm Springs, California.
And I believe you're enjoying your Post magazine life out there.
I'm really enjoying it. I'm still working a little bit. I just did a book that came out in November on vintage fashion in Hollywood and this old vintage shop. And I'm definitely enjoying my time off, but still available for interesting projects.
Terrific. So tell us what originally drew you to photography and publications?
Born and raised in California. I was living in Newport Beach and going to high school, and it was either my sophomore year or my junior year. A friend of mine's sister needed an assistant to come and work in the office, just basically a gopher to file and run errands and things like that. And it was called Bond Publishing, which was subsequently bought by CBS Publications, and they published Road and Track and Cycle World magazine. So that was really my first magazine experience. And I was 16. And I just really loved the people, and I really liked the excitement of seeing the magazine that was produced at the end of the day. And it really got me very interested. I was always looking at magazines. My mother had a lot of magazines, so I was very interested in that. And then my second job after that was at the LA Times, and I worked in the library. I was one of two people who managed all the prints and negatives of the newspaper photographers. And then I got completely addicted to news because at the newspaper, it was so great. At the library, whenever anything would happen, the reporters would run in and they would want clips pulled. And so we were always the first ones to hear the news. And so that really interested me. And so now I had two jobs in photography. So the resume was just starting to build. The next job, I was married at the time, and my ex-husband was getting a lot of work. And so I quit my job and I started repping him. So I was meeting a lot of clients, mostly in the record cover business and magazines in LA. And after we split up, I got a job at A&M Records in LA. And I managed the photo studio. It was always kind of admin stuff. But a friend of mine, Mary Shanahan, was the art director at Rolling Stone, and they had moved to New York. And she used to call me and ask me to help out on shoots in Los Angeles. So I was working with Annie, and I was helping her with production shoots. I think the most famous one was I found the hotel for the Blues Brothers cover, and I was there at the Blues Brothers cover shoot where she painted their face blue. They did not want to do that shoot. They were like, we're not doing that. We'll do other things, but we're not doing that. She kept asking them over and over. And finally, at the end of the shoot, she was still begging them. And she said, okay, I'll do it, but I promise it won't be used on the cover.
Yeah, right.
I was there. I saw it. I heard it. And guess what the cover was? Them with their faces painted blue. They didn't talk to her for a while. But anyway, I was doing a little bit of freelance, working at A&M Records. And at one point, Mary said, I really think you should come to New York and be the photo editor at Rolling Stone. And I was like, I don't really know what a photo editor does. And she's like, yeah, you do. You're already basically doing it. So I moved to New York and I started working at Rolling Stone. For me, the thing that was important about the time that I went there was Annie was just leaving the magazine after working there since the beginning in 67 or whenever it started. And she was basically the staff photographer and she had her choice of whatever job she wanted. And she was shooting all the covers. So all of a sudden I became the photo director and Annie was leaving and going off to Vanity Fair. So it was an incredible opportunity, but really scary at the same time, because how do you replace Annie Leibovitz? So that got me to Rolling Stone, and now I had that title, and I worked there for the next 14 years.
Annie went on to photograph Graydon Carter for his passport photo, as we have learned from Graydon's new book.
No, I think Tina was there. I don't think Graydon was there yet. I only say that because I'm reading Graydon's book right now.
Oh, okay. So nice, quick graduation from pictures of Camaros and Mustangs to celebrities and musicians.
Yeah, well, we were doing rock stars at A&M Records. Peter Frampton and Chuck Mangione. It was the same thing. But I'd never worked in a magazine before. I had been a gopher at a magazine, but I'd never been in charge. The very first cover I ever shot, I hadn't even moved to New York yet. It was Gary Busey when he played Buddy Holly's story. That was my first cover.
So what is the role of a photo editor or a director of photography at a magazine like Rolling Stone? I often think of photo editors as unsung heroes, don't get a lot of credit. What was your role?
When I first started at Rolling Stone, I was the photo editor. That was my title. The first art director that I worked under was Mary Shanahan. She hired me. But at that moment, Bea Feitler was actually working at Rolling Stone. She had been brought on as a consultant. So I was working for Mary and Bea. I wasn't doing the covers yet. I think Mary was still pretty much doing the covers. But shortly after that, I started doing them. And really, my role there at that time was finding new great photographers that could really shoot covers. That's really the most important thing at the magazine, even though the inside pictures are ultimately much more interesting and have a lot more design. The cover is ultimately the most important thing. And the way I looked at it is I'm going to call the photographers that I love. And if they say yes, that's great. And if they say no, that's okay too. So I started working with Albert Watson and I started working with Herb Ritz and worked my way up. I mean, everybody wanted to shoot for Rolling Stone. I didn't realize the power until I started calling people and everybody was interested. Pretty much everybody. It took me a while to get Avedon to shoot anything. But yeah, my work there was going to all the meetings, talking about what was coming up in the issues, doing homework on people, deciding what photographers would be good, and then setting up the shoots, all the production, and all that mishigosh with the managers and the publicist and all that. And then going on the shoot, making sure that we got the cover, that got the pictures, and then bringing it back in and editing the film, and then going over the film with the art directors and possibly Jan, not always Jan, but sometimes Jan. My favorite line at the light table is after they look at the work and they go, "Are these the best pictures?" And it's, "No, the best pictures are in the second drawer in my office and I didn't bring them." Anyway, that was always happening. And the worst was when Jan didn't like it and he was like, "We want to reshoot it." Because in those days, having to reshoot something, it's bad enough when you're calling the original photographer, but it's really bad when Jan doesn't even want you to shoot with the photographer that shot the work that's getting killed.
Well, reshoot isn't even always possible, is it?
No, not at all. Yeah, usually not.
Yeah.
But again, I didn't do that many reshoots. I would say in the whole time I was at Rolling Stone, I maybe did 5 or 6 reshoots. And some of those were the subject matter didn't even show up. I remember Terrence Trent D'Arby was an hour late, and then he was 2 hours late, and he never showed up. He just never showed up. But also, what was interesting about Rolling Stone was we did celebrities, but we also did photojournalism, and we even did photo illustration type work for fiction. And they did a lot of illustration, but we also did photo illustration. So it was really fun because we did a lot of different things. And Jan had really good taste. He hired great people and he knew when he had something good. He was very well-rounded in that way.
We'll be right back.
Hi, this is Jeremy Leslie at Mag Culture. We're proud to support the Print is Dead podcast because we love magazines too. Visit magculture.com and see why print is far from over. It's just getting started. Read the journal for interviews and reviews, listen to our podcasts, visit our shop in London and online, and come to our live events in London and New York. We love magazines. Subscribe to our newsletter for weekly updates, all at magculture.com.
Take us to a Rolling Stone photo shoot, a typical one if there is such a thing. Who is there and who the hell's in charge?
I'm in charge. Different magazines work different ways. At some magazines, the art director will work with the photo editors. At some magazines, the photo director doesn't go to any of the shoots. And in some places, the art director or the creative director will sketch out the cover he wants, and it'll be done from a drawing. That's a different kind of magazine. That's not how Rolling Stone worked. Rolling Stone, I would say because of Annie, always had a very strong photo department. It was a bone of contention because we had a room full of really great designers and they never went on the shoots. They didn't have input into what we were going to do. Before the shoot, you would do your homework and you would talk to the photographer and you would come up with some ideas, but you have to be ready to throw all those ideas out the window and just make a good picture. And sometimes you have photographers who make pictures and you have photographers who take pictures. And some photographers are not that flexible and other photographers are really good on the spot, changing up things. And so at Rolling Stone, it was generally sometimes the writer and the photo editor. That was pretty much it. And the manager and the publicist, and then the photo crew and the hair and the makeup. The less people, the better, because the person is more comfortable and the publicist doesn't get in the way. And in the early days, the shoots were pretty small, but once we got into the 80s, the shoots became big productions. And like I said, different photographers shot. Albert Watson was very direct. There weren't ideas behind his pictures. He just had fantastic pictures. They were very raw, they were very strong, but they weren't idea-oriented. Mark Seliger, on the other hand, was very much about ideas. And in the 80s, it was very much about production of photographs. So it became a different kind of photo.
Were those more likely to be well planned in advance and then actually executed successfully?
It depended on who the artist was that you were photographing. Some people would come up with ideas and they'd have everything ready there. Some people, we would share the idea. Annie would share a lot of the ideas, but as the publicist and the manager at the record companies got more involved, photographers pulled back. So it just depended on who you were shooting. And sometimes I would choose a photographer who I thought would get along with the person. And sometimes I would choose a photographer that I thought would push things. I just mixed it up a little bit. I've heard that I've been accused of having a 5-card Rolodex because I didn't use a lot of different people. I did have my stable of photographers that I developed and worked with. And about halfway through my tenure there, I had a drop-off policy on Wednesdays for portfolios. And it was Wednesday, I was looking at the portfolios and I opened up this one book and I just couldn't believe how great the pictures were. So I took it back to the front desk and I said, when this photographer comes in, let me know. I definitely want to meet him. And it was Mark Seliger. And Mark became the second photographer to actually have a contract with Rolling Stone. And I worked with him a lot. And it was really fun. I mean, Mark was the kind of guy that either he would have a really big production, or one of the shoots I always remember was we were shooting Dana Carvey, and Dana Carvey came into the studio and Mark had brought like a fishbowl of goldfish. So we had a bunch of goldfish and he asked Dana to put one of the goldfish in his mouth and just let it hang out. And Dana was like, if you guys do it, I'll do it. So Mark and I put goldfish in our mouth and Dana did it. And that's been one of my favorite covers. I just think it's so funny. His humor was simple, but really funny. Mark was fantastic. And then he went to Vanity Fair.
And Mark is the subject of a previous podcast of ours. Listeners can find on the website in the archive. Did you ever come back from a shoot, you thought you'd scored, you had it, and it was something that actually wasn't going to work or was rejected for some other reason?
No, I pretty much knew. You pretty much have the feeling. In those days, everybody was shooting Polaroids. So you did have that Polaroid to look at. And we had a little cover cell that we would put over the Polaroid. So you had a pretty good idea. If the shoot wasn't going well, if the person wasn't giving anything, you knew it.
Yeah. Well, on the eve
Yeah.
of a shoot or the morning of a shoot, you've got everything set up. You're the one in charge. What's your emotional state, or what's it like going into that?
Nervous, anxious. And one of the things that always happens, that you get more anxious as you're there because they have to come for hair and makeup. And that takes forever. It especially takes forever with women. I have a funny story about waiting and waiting. We were shooting Guns N' Roses. And I remember beforehand, the publicist called and she said, "Oh, I'm calling about the food." And she's like, "Okay, Slash wants Chinese food and Axel wants sushi." And like all 5 of them wanted different stuff to eat. But they started arriving and it was getting late and Axel was not there yet. And we were shooting at the studio that had a private driveway. So you could drive the car into the studio, up a ramp, and bring the car right in. So finally, after 5 hours of waiting, Axel arrives and the limo comes up the driveway and parks and the engine shuts off and we're waiting and we're waiting and we're waiting. And Axel was in there at least an hour before he came out. And when he came out, 2 women came out right behind him.
Did you ever find yourself having to bark at any subjects of your photo shoots?
No, I wouldn't do that. Maybe some photographers, but no, not really, because I would let the photographers do the kind of work that they do. I mean, that was one of the reasons why photographers like to work with me, because I didn't force them. I don't know better than the photographer how to do the picture. I know what I like. And I can tell them when I'm there. I know if it's going well, but I gave a lot of freedom to the photographers. My decisions were made when I picked up the phone and called them. That was when I would make the ultimate decision. And yes, we would talk about the person, or we would talk about, could we do black and white, or should we have an idea, or should we just photograph them straight on? One of my other favorite covers that we shot was with Albert Watson, and it was Eric Clapton. And it was just a few weeks after his son had died in a terrible, tragic accident. Yeah. And Albert did the cover, and it was just a profile, not exactly a profile, 3/4 length shot of Eric. And it was really simple, and it was so powerful. And that was typical Albert. I guess the 3 photographers that I used most often were Herb Ritz, Mark Seliger, and Albert Watson. Frank Lockenfels is another photographer who I would count on to do difficult shoots because he always gets the picture.
Who shot Tina Turner?
Stephen Meisel shot Tina Turner for us. The picture that's on the first Rolling Stone photography book of Tina Turner is by Stephen Meisel.
Okay, is that the one where it looks like she's jumping?
Yeah.
Great shoot, I thought.
Yeah, he was amazing. We worked with him right before Madonna did her book. We did a big shoot with her at Nell's, this nightclub that was down on 14th Street. And that was a precursor to her book, because he did this amazing picture of her sitting in a chair, holding a drink with her legs and drinking from it, and really great photos. He was really good.
Was she literally jumping for that
She was
that
dancing.
picture?
She was dancing. Yeah.
Just such simple but great energy in that.
Yeah, and I think, I definitely Annie started that, but the covers are really posters. The covers have to be strong with energy and very recognizable when you're walking by the newsstand. Those were the days of newsstand covers. Covers are, I can't say they're the least interesting thing to shoot, because they're not. They're a challenge, but some photographers really know how to shoot covers and others just don't.
Yeah, well, another one that seems very much a poster was the Hot List, some of those covers. Herb Ritz did Cindy Crawford. Were you there for that one?
No, not there for that one. Cindy Crawford was actually my last cover. My first cover was Gary Busey. My last cover was Cindy Crawford. We did do shoots with her, but funny things happened at Rolling Stone. Like at one point, the ad people on the business side wanted to sell fashion. So we had to start doing fashion. And that was kind of a joke because nobody there was really prepared to do fashion. We hired Joe McKenna, and he was the fashion director, and he knew how to do fashion. We went through different stages of trying to get more advertising in the magazine, even though they had a lot of advertising.
Did you have your own set of rules in any way for a photo shoot?
No, not really.
Are there any rules for making a great photo?
No, I think it's just instinctual. I think it comes from inside. I would say that photographers that have a history, that know the history of photography or know the history of magazine photography and are inspired by other photographers.
We'll be right back.
Print is Dead is made possible by the support of the Society of Publication Designers. The SPD powers the future of visual storytelling, setting the standard for editorial excellence and shaping the future of visual culture. For more information, visit spd.org.
Earlier, you referenced your former husband, Antonin Kratochvil, and you told me that through him, you really delved into and got to a better understanding of photography.
Of photojournalism. Yeah, photojournalism, but not covers. But we lived in Holland, we lived in Amsterdam, and he was always showing me the work of all the photojournalists. Magnum was the highest level agency that you could be with. And we did have photojournalism in Rolling Stone, and I did bring Salgado. I met Salgado and brought him to Jan, and we did work with Salgado under contract for a while, and Marielle and Mark, and I worked with some great photojournalists. And that was the other side that I really loved because that was more gritty. It was usually black and white. We did a story on a boy and his pit bull in Philadelphia. Just really different kind of quirky kind of things. I loved working with Marielle, and I had a really good relationship with her. Rolling Stone was able to give me a nice wide berth in terms of the kinds of stories that they had. That's why it was so interesting to come when Annie was leaving, because it was wide open, but I did know what they were used to. And I also think it's interesting. I made a little list because I was interested myself in all the different art directors that I worked with. Can I tell you who they were?
Please, name the names.
Okay, I'm naming some names. Bea Feitler, Mary Shanahan, Raul Martinez, Derek Unglis, Stephen Doyle, Fred Woodward, Gail Anderson, Deb Bishop, Jolene Kyler, Carla Frank, Rip Georges, and Paul Roloffs. And I think there was more, but I worked with a lot of different art directors, and they taught me so much. And also a not great picture or kind of a average picture would come in, and those designers would make that picture sing. I remember one picture that Herb took of Arnold Schwarzenegger on the beach, and he had this big inner tube. And I think it was either Deb or Gail, I think it was Gail. She incorporated that big inner tube to be an O in the title. They just did magic things with the pictures. They made the pictures better. They definitely made the pictures more interesting and better. So thank you to all the art directors I worked with. They're really amazing people, and I learned a lot from them.
Is there a role to play for people with your talents these days? Print magazines are gone by the wayside, but are there any role for photo editors out there? Everybody's got their camera. Everybody's taking pictures. Everybody thinks it's simple.
There were magazines where the photo department had a different place at the magazines. Like I can tell you Time and Newsweek and Rolling Stone and certain magazines had very strong photo departments that dealt directly with the editors at the magazine and dealt with the writers. And then other magazines, maybe smaller magazines, or maybe like Condé Nast. I don't think the role of the photo editors at Condé Nast in those days was very strong. The creative directors were over the photo department. And what happened was the art directors wanted more involvement in the photography. And I think that it was probably easier for the editors to deal with one art director than it was to deal with an art director, a photo editor. I think it was a little bit, not confusing, but a little bit antagonistic. I would say that it was maybe a little bit antagonistic. And I know that the really great designers, they didn't really go to shoots. They wanted to learn who the photographers were. They wanted to work with the photographers. So things started changing. And also the business side of the magazines got more powerful because it was all about advertising. And of course, at a place like Rolling Stone, where it's owned by one person who's the editor, he listened to the business side. I know that there's still photo editors, but there's not a lot of directors of photography. I think that they come under the umbrella of the art department now. And I know a lot of people retired or got out of the business, or they eliminated that position as time went on. And now the title of photo editor, not in every magazine, but in a lot of magazines, is really a technical person who crops pictures and sizes them. It's more of a production role. But that's not true of every magazine. Look at the New York Times. They have an incredibly strong photo department, and other magazines.
I don't want to ignore InStyle, quite a different magazine than Rolling Stone. What was it like shooting those covers, which pretty much fit a template, I would say?
Yeah, it was interesting because when I first started there, I started working on the test issues there. I was there very early on. And Martha Nelson, the editor, had come from People magazine. And they started testing issues and they had portraits of people on white. And they decided that was the way that they wanted to go. And yes, it was definitely a template. It was head and shoulders and maybe down to the waist, but very seldom full body. And it made it easy to know what they wanted, but it was boring, but the magazine did really well. I remember like about a month after we started it up, the New York Post called us the Suck Up magazine. But something interesting about InStyle was when we first started, they didn't even do head to toe photographs in magazines, like the fashion magazines. They weren't calling out every single thing that the person was wearing. And we were the first magazine that started showing head to toe people, but the covers weren't interesting. They weren't that interesting. You would go into the shoot and get the cover done and then move on to the inside. We did a lot of travel stories. We traveled a lot with that magazine. So the inside was somewhat better, but conservative. Yeah,
Well, yeah, and the covers had a strong branded identity.
absolutely. Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. I remember we'd have these viewings at the light table, and it would usually be the art director, myself, Martha, and usually the editor that was working on the story, and sometimes the production manager. And we'd put all the work out on the light table, and Martha would come in and she'd lean over and she'd look at it and she'd look at it. And then she'd look at me and she'd go, "This is a hard one." That was her expression. And it's like the slightest thing, like, "Oh, I don't like the hair." If she didn't like the hair, it ruined the whole cover. If she didn't like the makeup, it ruined the cover. If she didn't like the clothes, it ruined the cover. So any one of those things or a combination of those things, she wouldn't like the cover. She was very particular about the covers, and I couldn't believe how much drama they were for the art directors, the design directors too. Just the type. I mean, they must have done 200 versions of type and words.
I'm sure somebody somewhere had numbers on whether redheads, blondes, or brunettes sold better,
Oh, yeah.
too.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm trying to think of some of the cover rules. Obviously, dark is not good. Light is better. Like brown, don't use brown, don't use yellow. Over the years, there's been many cover rules.
Well, that's why I really liked hearing your take on the rules of the photo shoot. Have you ever been a photographer yourself? What kind of a photographer are you?
I take terrible pictures. Even my Instagram pictures are not interesting. No, but I will admit I'm pretty good at hiring people. I know what I like. I collect photography. I collect a lot of photography. I do know the history of photography. And no, I don't try to take pictures.
You do have on your website, I think, a fun zone page. You were doing selfies before they were called selfies.
At the very end of the shoot, I would run up to the person and I would go, "Can we take a picture together?" And I always felt a little bit weird about doing that, but you know what? I loved having the pictures. And I would hang like 8 by 10s in my office, and it used to drive Jan crazy because he was friends with all these people and he didn't like that I had these pictures with these people. He'd come by and he'd make fun of them, but he also had them.
Yeah, I could tell they're after the shoots are over because there's an intimacy and a friendliness, and they're quite candid. Let me wrap this up by asking you, what advice might you give to someone, a young person who is interested in photography, the visual arts?
I think the most important thing and the longest lasting advice I can give them is to work on their style. First of all, a lot of photographers that go out with their portfolios, they haven't really developed a style yet. So photo editors get the work and they don't really know what they're going to get. So I think the most important thing is working on your style and finding a style that you like, that you're passionate about, and really develop that. Because first of all, the pictures are going to be better and they're going to have more consistency, but also you're going to love what you're doing more. So you're going to be more passionate about it. So I would say spend more time up front just developing your style. And the other thing is, really, well, I can't say spend time at the newsstands anymore because there aren't any newsstands. That's a sad thing.
Yeah, yeah.
God, I used to spend so much money on magazines. It was crazy. I would look, and as soon as I'd see a name that I liked the picture, I would call the people. But really, you have to be incredibly passionate about photography to want to have that occupation. You have to love it for what it is, not that you're going to get a cover of a Rolling Stone or that you're going to get a cover of Vogue or whatever. You just have to be passionate about what you're doing. And that's probably true in any occupation.
It relates to what you said earlier about those who make photographs versus those who take photographs, right?
Yeah. Both can be very successful. I think that would be the biggest piece of advice. And maybe they teach more business now in school, but they certainly didn't when I was working. And the photographers, if you were lucky enough to go to a magazine and get an assignment, you better know how to produce it, what you have to do, who you have to talk to, do your homework. There's ways of doing things, and probably really one of the most professional and user-friendly photographer that I ever worked with. Mark Seliger is very good, but Art Streiber, his work was always presented in such a wonderful way with full captions. Working with Art, he took a lot of the hard work away. A lot of photographers are like, I take pictures, I don't do admin stuff, but you have to do that. You have to work in the business and know how to behave in the business and how to make a photo editor happy with your results. You can't just turn a bunch of pictures in. You have to be involved in that part of it too.
Anything else you'd like to say about your career, about life?
I'm very interested in this podcast. There's a lot of different kinds of people that do it. I think it's really interesting. And I was asking myself, is print dead? And I don't think it is. I think it's changing. If you go to the newsstand, there's a lot of specialty magazines, vanity magazines. And I just think that it's so much more interesting to hold a magazine in your hands. And I have faith that magazines are going to exist.
Well, good. That's optimistic. And I tend to agree that the print magazine business model may be dead, but print need not be dead.
I think the business side kind of killed magazines because it became more about the advertising and they had more power and it just changed it.
Yes, and you have just joined the chorus of voices on this podcast who pretty much
Good.
are all in sync. We're still looking for the magic way to resolve this and have a brand new magazine business.
I worked with Roger Black on a digital magazine company called Nomad Editions. And I was so optimistic that this was going to work. This was, more than 10 years ago. And they just didn't fly. One of the things I think is most interesting about publishing is what Deb Bishop is doing at the New York Times. She's turned her section into a must-see. I love it.
For more on this and all of our episodes, visit our website where, in addition to complete transcripts of all our interviews, along with portfolios, archival photos, links, and other great information on our guests, you'll find our blog, Entry Points, about all things magazine, and our ever-expanding swag shop with all kinds of great custom merch. You can also support the podcast by clicking the adorable yellow button at the top of the page, all available at magazium.co.
Print is Dead, Long Live Print is a member of the Hub and Spoke Audio Collective, a nonprofit association of audio storytellers dedicated to promoting and sustaining high-quality, independent podcasting. Learn more at hubspokeaudio.org.
Magazium is made possible by the generous support of listeners like you. If you love our shows and can't wait for new episodes, or even if you just listen from time to time and love knowing we're here, please consider making a donation to help keep us going. Visit magazium.co/support.
Print is Dead, Long Live Print is a production of Magazium, LLC. For more information, visit our website, magazium.co, or follow us on social media at magazium.co. Please give us a like and a review on your favorite podcast app. It really helps. Thanks very much for listening.